Hello guys, thanks for joining me. We have Professor Dave Randall join us for this mini sociology series, and the title of today's topic is The World of Work, the Paradox of Technology, Social and Coercive Control, and the Big Brother Surveillance Society. So there's quite a lot of in that title itself. So basically a brief overview of this topic. There was a report in Sweden where some people have volunteered to be injected with a bio implant chip, approximately about the size of a grain of rice. And then what this does is it allows people to gain access to maybe the door at work, the photocopier. They can pay bills with it, go to a supermarket, and I think I even saw a guy pay his train fare, and it's got all the data in there. And one of the big selling points is convenience. So Dave, because I know you've worked quite extensively in Sweden, to what degree do you think this is a future form of coercive social control, limiting people's freedom and autonomy?
Well, I don't. That's the short answer. I don't think any technology by itself determines the way in which people live their lives, or the way in which governments, or indeed any other agency, controls our lives. The technology affords it, makes it possible, but whether it actually controls us or not is largely a function of what different social groups decide to do with it. Those social groups can include government. So I think we talked briefly previously about the social credit system in China. Now, there's no doubt at all that the internet has enabled the Chinese government to monitor individuals in such a way. When individuals use Tencent and other organizations to do their commercial transactions and so on, it enables the Chinese government to monitor their behavior and decide, as it were, whether they're good citizens or not. But it's not the technology that makes that happen, it's the government. The technology enables it, the government decides that it wants to do that with it. And in much the same way with biochips and so on. If you think about it, a biochip of that kind is just a credit card in your arm, that's all it is really. And there's always been a kind of libertarian stroke anarchist view that money in that form, credit cards, etc., carries with it a risk, and the risk is that there is data inherent in it. Well, so there is in a Tesco club card. Why do you think Tesco have club cards? The reason is because they collect a great deal of data from you when you purchase things and use your club card. But it's up to you whether you have a club card or not. You don't have to use these things. You don't have to have a credit card. Yeah. Interestingly enough, the number of people in this country who have credit cards is in decline. Number of people with debit cards isn't, but with credit cards, it's in decline. The technology doesn't determine things. The technology allows various social groups to do things with it. And the same is true in the world of work as anywhere else. You'll know from your own studies that production line technology, when it was first instituted through the likes of Henry Ford in the USA, production line technology had the effect of reducing capitalist costs very substantially. It allowed for a degree of standardization. In turn, that allowed ordinary people to own things like cars. Yeah, so the Model T Ford, famously, any color you like as long as it's black. The Model T Ford was cheap and affordable for most ordinary families. So without doubt, it came with certain benefits. Now, it came with a cost as well. And Harry Braverman pointed this out many years ago. The sociologist Harry Braverman pointed this out, that the cost is that the life of the average worker in a car firm was a great deal more boring. It's basically alienating. And it can be argued that the introduction of technology of that kind ultimately has the effect of reducing wages. And there's no doubt that you can see in some areas that technology has had that effect of reducing wages, increasing levels of job insecurity, and through that you can argue that it's a social control mechanism. If people are worried about losing their jobs or worried about how to feed their kids, then they are more amenable to social control, no question about that. But the social control is delivered by the people, like the people who own the factories, like the people who run governments and so on, not on its own by the technology. I take the view that technology is neutral. It's what's done with it that matters.
So Dave, would you say that, like, to use like a metaphor analogy, that technology is like a vice, and really depending on how it's used, in what kind of situation it can support the society or it can kind of crush it? But I think that, I mean, I personally wouldn't want to get have an implant, a chip into me. I don't know. Do you not feel that there's something more sinister behind it? In terms of leading society down a particular path.
Well, I think there would be if you lost control over what is done with the data contained in that chip. And that's why in the EU we have GDPR, data regulations, to stop companies and other organizations using your data without your permission, which I'm all in favor of. And it is this notion of a chip in your arm is a version of what today is usually called the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things refers to the way in which internet-enabled devices no longer just talk to you, they talk to each other. So an energy monitor in your home is as an example of a primitive, if you like, Internet of Things device. And of course, one of the issues there is to some extent, if you don't know who has access to your data and what they're using it for, then you lose control over it. I mean, that evidently is true. If you don't know what data is being collected about you and what it's being used for, then you cannot possibly have any control over it. Now, whether that's a risk or not, again, depends on what other agencies do with it. It's certainly the case that the opportunities for surveillance today are greater than they ever were before. There's no doubt about that. But what happens to you when these surveillance devices of one kind or another, and by surveillance I don't necessarily just mean cameras, but any technology that collects data about you, what matters is what they're doing with it. We have one of those monitoring things to monitor consumption of electricity in our house, and I took the view it doesn't really matter whether we've got one or not. And it doesn't, as long as the only people who use that data are the electricity company, and as long as the only thing they know about me is how much electricity I'm using. If for instance, and this becomes possible with the Internet of Things and more sophisticated devices, if the device can monitor not only how much electricity you consume, but exactly what you are doing with the devices, where you are in your home, and so on. In other words, where monitoring becomes a lot more complete, then the risks are greater, no question. And there have been examples, as you probably know, with things like Alexa and so on, where they had to acknowledge that actually Alexa was recording the conversations of people in their home. That there is a risk to that. This whole business of chip in the arm, I actually have met the guy that all started with. It started with a guy called Kevin Warwick in Reading University many years ago. He was the first person to do that, and he did it as a kind of test to see what it did for him. I always thought he was a bit of a geek, he was keen on these things and hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about what the risks might be. But as I say, overall, I think technologies in and of themselves are neutral. It's what we do with them that matters.
Because Dave, I heard, I was speaking with one of my friends about this, and he was telling me something about data mining. And you're saying data mining is really valuable to a lot of companies. I think in some pieces of data are worth more than gold in its value.
Well, it'd be hard to make a comparison. I mean, yes, I mean, in career terms, for instance, if you're in computer science, there's no doubt. In fact, a lot of people beyond computer science may qualify themselves to work with this kind, but data analytics, as it's called, is a big burgeoning work area. And the point here is that data is coming in many, many different forms now. Every time you switch on your mobile phone, if it's GPS enabled, then in principle data about where you are is available to different companies. And it can be used in lots of different ways, of course. And data is available. I actually lecture on this to my Swedish students. Big data, as it's sometimes called, has a number of characteristics that data didn't used to have. And one of them is that it's real time. So if you think about GPS data is changing every second. So the people who are collecting data can do, and there are many, many organizations collecting that data, they do it in real time. So they can figure out a great deal about patterns of mobility, which shops you go to, and so on. And it can be used for lots and lots of different purposes. I think the risks are there. If you think about the risks in terms of health, genomic data, as it's called, data about your genetic makeup is such that it already can to a certain extent, but will be able to more and more give a statistical analysis of what the risk to you of certain kinds of disease will be. So by way of example, it's very, very well known that breast cancer is genetically linked. And it will come as a surprise to your students maybe, but breast cancer is almost as common amongst men as it is amongst women.
Oh,
wow. It's not a female disease at all.
Cool.
What was I going to say about breast cancer? Think about this in terms of insurance. There you are, perfectly healthy, but your genetic makeup is such that it shows that the risk of you contracting a disease of that kind, or in fact any other disease, is statistically greater than it is for other people. Well, insurance companies will certainly, if they have that kind of data, charge you more for your life insurance. And in much the same way, of course, as they already do to a certain extent, more refined data collection in respect of things like theft, burglary, and so on, enables companies of that kind to make better judgments about house insurance. And they are beginning to use that. They are beginning to do it. It's very early days, but they are beginning to do it. And we're seeing, as I said, I used the example of Tesco club cards. It's the same thing. That is data mining. That's what they're doing with it. So, the fact is data is valuable, yes. And the more data that's out there, the more they will be able to figure out about you. And it can be used, let me finish the argument, it can be used for political purposes. You saw that in the last US election, there was a big controversy about a British company called Cambridge Analytica. And we still don't really know how much effect Cambridge Analytica had on the last election. But Cambridge Analytica, before that election, claimed that they had 5,000 data points about every single individual who lives in this country. 5,000 different bits of information about every single person who lives in this country. Your age, your gender, the things you buy, your political interests, the music you like, and so on. 5,000 different things they know about each person in this country. Now, if that's true, that's a little bit concerning that there are organizations out there that know an awful lot about you.
Yep.
And it can be used, and my point again, it can be used for lots and lots of different purposes.
Because it kind of I saw that a program about Cambridge Analytica, I think it was on Netflix, and I think it started off with a guy saying that he wanted to find out what this data was being used for. And I think he couldn't get a straight answer, and that's kind of what made him so irritated, that he couldn't find out who's got it, what it's being used for. So Dave, with all of this going on with kind of, the data mining, AI, robotization, automation, so all of these kind of things, what do you think it will hold for the future of jobs? And do you think all of this is being underscored with like a digital revolution catalyzed by globalization?
That's a very big question, and there's no obvious answer to it. We can see certain trends now. Whether those trends will be maintained, it's very, very hard to see. Starting with AI, I am skeptical about AI having very dramatic effects in the near future. I think I've said this to you before, but AI is by no means advanced as some people think it is. The algorithms that are used are still relatively primitive, and what has really changed is processing power in computers rather than more and more sophisticated algorithms. So I'm not that worried about AI. It's having a certain impact in terms of what are sometimes called decision support systems. In other words, certain kinds of professional white-collar skill are being, to a certain extent, replicated by AI systems. There are claims made that AI systems can diagnose illness as well as human beings. It's very, very difficult to assess whether that's true or not. You always have to filter it through the people who are trying to sell you these systems in the first place. So it could be that the claims are exaggerated. But there's a certain truth in this, that skilled work is kind of under a certain level of threat. I think that the other kinds of threat are more serious. We see with what is called the platform economy, sometimes called the gig economy. But the platform economy has rather changed the way in which business gets done. Business models are changing.
Yeah.
And we see this in a lot of different ways. We see, for instance, business giving you stuff for free, which is a pretty new development. Spotify's business model is to give you the choice. You can have it for free or you can pay for it. If you have it for free, you're going to get adverts. If you decide to pay for it, you won't get adverts. Yeah. All those services that Google provide, us academics, we love Google Scholar. It's incredibly useful for us. It helps us do things like bibliographies at the end of papers and books and so on, so much faster. It's wonderful. But all of Google's services come at a cost, and the cost is data mining. They collect data about you. And every Google service is like that. It's given you for free. Searching on Google is given you for free, but they are collecting data all the time. And that translates into, of course, advertising, which is what, in effect, Google, Facebook, and Twitter all make their money from. They are advertising companies.
Because Dave, do you know, before Professor Stephen Hawking passed away, I think he was quite against AI. What do you think of his reasons for being against AI? Do you think, like the film?
I think he's wrong. I mean, it sounds very arrogant to say someone like Stephen Hawking is wrong, but you must always remember, even very brilliant people can sometimes be stupid. And I think in this particular instance, he was stupid. He was working on this. This is a very difficult thing to get across to people if they're not, if they don't understand philosophical argument. But that kind of belief that AI is going to take over the world is based on the belief that the human mind is a computer. And therefore, if computers are developed that are faster and more effective than the human mind, they'll take over the world. But the human mind is not a computer, in my opinion. And trying to understand the way in which human beings work, they're not calculating machines. If they were, they'd be a hell of a lot better at calculation than they actually are. Ask any kid what their least favorite subject is, and they'll probably tell you it's maths. Yeah, we're not calculating machines, and we do it very badly. Computers are calculating machines, but they do a lot of things that human beings can do very well, very badly.
I mean, Dave, on a slightly different note, I was watching, I think it was on some sort of Discovery channel, and it was saying that, do you know, some people in like homes, nursing homes and these things, having kind of companions, for people who are old, not necessarily just old, people who are, in homes and stuff, but it's like a robot. And I think I've forgotten her name, there's some robot who's very famous. But do you not think that's kind of like dehumanizing, and it's taking away part of our humanity?
No, I don't. As it happens, I've done some research in this area. Yeah. With my colleagues in Germany, we actually put a robot in an old people's home. And that, you notice a number of things about it. One, that the robot's really quite primitive. It's not at all clever. The issue is whether people can tell the difference between human beings and robots. Yes, they can. Can they nevertheless enjoy the things that happen with the robot? Yes, they can, in much the same way that you can enjoy listening to music. You know, it's not dehumanizing to listen to music, you just enjoy it. The most valuable thing we discovered when we did this work, which has been published, the most valuable thing we found was that it liberated carers from all the routine tasks that they otherwise had to do. It gave them time.
Respite.
Yeah.
But Dave, what would happen if, say, we get to a situation where you can't differentiate between the robot and the human? Do you think that's dangerous?
Again, it depends. You have to try and understand this business of calculation and why calculation is not the important thing. You have to think in terms of what a robot's reasons would be for doing something. Now, we have no trouble at all thinking about a human being's reasons. We have reasons for doing this, we have reasons for doing that. Robots don't do anything unless they are told to. They don't have reasons. Robots have no motives, they have no reasons, yeah? And there's still no version of a robot today has a motive or a reason. They just do what they're told, yeah? They are programmed to do certain things and they do them. So, you know, the risk to the human race in terms of robots taking over is only a risk on the day that robots develop reasons for doing things. And there is no sign at all that they are doing that or ever will do it. They just do what they're told.
Because Dave, I saw something in the news a while back. I can't remember if it was Facebook or Google, but it was some sort of computer program. And then the program did something on its own. And then I think they shut it down straight away. I can't remember what it was.
I think you might be thinking of, I mean, there are, I'm trying to remember, it was Microsoft, I think. Microsoft developed a chatbot, which they did shut down, but they didn't shut it down because they didn't know what it was doing. They shut it down because they did know what it was doing. The problem was that this chatbot, the name of which I've now forgotten, but the chatbot was using what is called natural language processing to engage in conversations with people. Okay, now we know, don't we, that there are certain things that you really shouldn't say to other people. We know that basically things like racist comments, sexist comments and so on are by and large unacceptable to us, and so we don't say things of that sort. Okay, we do know that certain kinds of people do say things of that sort. Now, what happened with this particular chatbot was that it was learning. It was using a particular form of learning called unsupervised learning, which is a form of AI. What it does in effect is it takes the language that's being used towards it and it clusters the words together and repurposes them to give sentences back. Okay, but it has no understanding whatsoever of the context in which these words are used. So guess what? All those trolls out there, when they found out that this chatbot was acting as though it was, I think, a 15-year-old girl, they started asking it all sorts of disgraceful things, and all sorts of trolling type comments were made to it. And the algorithm responded by making the same sort of comment back. Okay, completely unintelligently. That's the point. Any intelligent person would know that, whoa, these are unacceptable things to say. Please don't talk like that to me, and so on. This robot did not know, the chatbot did not know that, and so it learned to speak in a very sexist and racist way. And it was at that point that Microsoft shut it down. It was only ever a test. They were just they were basically trying to test out natural language processing and how well it worked. It's if you like, proof that chatbots of the kind don't have any intelligence at all. They respond very automatically, and you must again, difficult to explain for somebody who doesn't understand a lot about AI, but there are, broadly speaking, two kinds of AI, or at least machine learning, which is almost the same thing. There's what's called supervised learning and there's what's called unsupervised learning, and they both of them done on the face of it some rather impressive things. So with unsupervised learning, for instance, a machine learned to play Go, which is a Japanese game, and Go is reckoned to be about 1,000 times more complicated than chess. And the machine learned to win games of Go, on the face of it, in about 24 hours.
Wow.
And it beat the world champion in the space of starting from nowhere to 24 hours later. Okay, now it sounds very impressive, but all it's doing is following a set of rules. That it learns the rules as it goes along. It learns that you know, in certain positions you've got an advantage, in other positions you don't. Develops the rules, and because its processing power is incredibly fast, it learns the rules very, very fast. And in any game of that kind, computers can learn to play those games very, very fast. Interestingly, there have been attempts to try and teach computers to play another game, and so far computers have been very bad at playing that game, and the game is poker. And the reason that computers are very bad at it is because human beings bluff.
Impression management.
Yeah, and computers just can't do that. Maybe one day they will be able to, but it's quite interesting that a computer that can play a game that requires a great deal of calculation, like Go, has not mastered how to play poker.
Yeah.
And it used to be said, I can't remember who said it, but used to be said that we've invented computers that know how to play chess, know how to play Go, but we haven't yet invented one that knows to take an umbrella out when it's raining.
Yeah.
In other words, they have no contextual knowledge, they have no common sense, and they have none of the things that we really recognize as intelligence. Yeah. Just calculating machines.
So Dave, I mean, you know, you've seen, you know, over the last 20, 30 years, technology just like boomed, hasn't it? I especially kind of with the internet starting with Google, I think in the year 2000. But do you know, like, technology and consumerism, do you think it's the modern day equivalent of like bread and entertainment? Very much like how at the time of the Roman Empire, people were kind of given literally bread and entertainment to kind of pacify them, make them docile.
Bread and circuses. Used to be called bread and circuses, yeah. I'm not sure that anything's changed. I mean, the Marxist sociologists many years ago used to argue that football was an example of that, like professional football is an example of exactly that. That if you can get the working classes obsessed with a particular football team, they won't be thinking about political realities. I think that's rather insulting. The idea that you're so dumb that in supporting Manchester United or Liverpool or whoever, that means you will never ever think about your own political realities, I think is wrong. You know, if you look at, I mean, we live in a consumer society, of course we do. That's a function of how much money we have. And again, an economist speaks here, but money doesn't just mean what you've got in your pocket. Money refers to what you can borrow as well. And we have, in that sense, in terms of what we have and what we can borrow, we have a great deal more money than we ever had before. And let's face it, if you look at the history of the Western world over the last 50 years, since the war, let's say, we're a great deal better off than we were just after the war. Great deal better off. And if you've got money, of course, that gives you consumer choice. And what you have had very definitely since the war is the development of niche economies, where a combination of new production techniques and money, you know, the ability of people to spend, has meant that the market has fragmented into lots of different kinds. So consumers have a huge amount of choice that they didn't have in the past. And lots of ways of spending money. You only have to look at the car lease arrangements today. If you look out a window and watch the cars go by, it's really striking that a very large proportion of those cars now are BMWs, or Mercedes, or some other kind of expensive SUV. Yeah, the vast majority of those cars don't belong to the people who are driving them. So they are leased to the people that are driving them. Yeah, and so you have, in effect, you have the legal right to drive that car for X number of years. After X number of years is over, you either pay up the rest or you give the car back. As long as interest rates stay low and people stay in jobs and so on, that's not a problem. If interest rates go up and people lose their jobs, it becomes a problem because they won't have a car to drive anymore. But the point is, again, consumer choice has rapidly increased as a result of money supply. As I say, the money you've got and the money you can borrow, and they've taken advantage of it. People spend a lot more money, and Marx suggested many years ago that everything got commodified. Everything that's possible to think of in the world of human behavior can be commodified, and it's true. And we've seen in a huge range of human activities are now part of the marketplace. That's absolutely true. Now, the important thing is what difference it makes. What difference does it make to people? I am not convinced that the answer is a lot. There is a sociological perspective which does come from Marxism largely, which argues that consumerism prevents people from ever becoming politically aware and so on. I actually don't think that's true. I think by and large the reason that people are not politically active for the most part is a fear that something bad will happen if you do start to get politically active, and B, couldn't care less, just don't really believe that it makes any difference. I don't really think that people are so wrapped up in things like football or music or whatever that they never give a thought to other stuff. If that were true, we wouldn't have loving families, for instance. I mean, we do. People do have personal lives that are extremely important to them, and it would be wrong to think that we no longer care about, so to speak, the intimate things because of commodification. I don't think it follows. We do live in a consumer society. Yes, people do sometimes, I think, spend more money than they should. I certainly have thought this for many years, but it may be that it's because I'm in a fairly luxurious position, but I have believed for a long time that it's better to be happy than rich. But that could be because I don't have any money troubles.
So with all of this as well, I think, because we know with this COVID-19 pandemic, so do you think with the COVID-19 and the increasing use of surveillance, do you think in general for society and in the workplace there's going to be more surveillance? And do you think it could also be used in a way to kind of impact people in a negative way?
I think that in certain areas, certain jobs of work, there will be more surveillance, and to an extent there already is. If you look at call center work, anybody who works in a call center on a computer, the speed at which they answer calls and the length of time it takes them to answer a call is already monitored. And I've done some research in a call center, and there's no question at all that there are algorithms working in the machine that are measuring how fast and accurately you're doing your work. And that, interestingly, as people start to work from home more, that's going to become more common, since if you work from home, nobody can look over your shoulder, can they? So the only way that any monitoring can be done is through a computer screen. And there are technologies already in use which do exactly that. Companies can insist, for instance, that you install bits of spyware, which basically mean that your camera is on all the time, which means they can tell whether you're at work or not. And keyloggers, as they're called. A bit of spyware and a keylogger together, not only can they see that you're at your computer, but they can see what you're typing. Because
it's like a digital panopticon, isn't it?
In a way, yeah.
Because Dave, I found, working with my students, I mean, one of the things I found is that really to get the best out of someone, you have to make them feel relaxed and at ease. And like, for example, when people do like sports, they don't really necessarily think about it. It becomes like automatic. But I think the minute you say to someone, the camera, you're being watched, I think that will cause anxiety amongst a lot of people. And
possibly.
Perform as well.
Possibly. I mean, you have to distinguish between short-term effects and long-term effects. I mean, I think if somebody in one of the universities I work for said, Dave, we want to install this software to make sure you're actually sitting in front of your computer for a certain number of hours a day, I'd resign there and then. I'd just stop.
Yeah.
In that position where I can. But if I were 22 years old, for the sake of argument, and just starting out, and the software was already there, and I signed a contract of employment, which basically said that I will be monitored, I suspect that it wouldn't bother me much. I suspect I wouldn't even think about it, because it's there as part of my work environment from the start. I was going to say I approve of it. Don't misunderstand me. I don't like the idea of people being constantly monitored, and I largely think it's unnecessary. I mean, my big argument about such things is that it assumes that people are trying to get away without doing any work. We see this to a certain extent, as you probably know, in the educational environment. There is that unwillingness to believe that you're working unless you can prove that you're working. As though most university lecturers or FE lecturers and so on would do nothing if they could get away with it. The fact is, that's not why we're motivated, by and large.
Yeah.
Actually, I never was monitored in any great way, although it kind of started a bit late on in my career, but for the most part I never was. It didn't stop me doing my job. Nobody ever in the whole of my career came into my classroom, this is as a university lecturer, to see whether I was any good at teaching, ever. So you might imagine that as a result I might sit there and think, well, yeah, okay, nobody's interested in how good I am as a teacher, so why should I bother? But my students are. My students care whether I am keeping them interested or not, and whether I look like I'm taking my job seriously. Well, that's enough for me. I'm not saying I was the best teacher in the world, but I tried. Doing my best to keep my students involved, to keep them interested. Still do my best to keep my students involved and interested. Nobody's monitoring me. So my argument would be that most of this monitoring is unnecessary. It's a kind of managerial paranoia that leads to it.
You think it's because maybe one of the objectives is to kind of drum up fear in people, and there's maybe no trust or lack of trust, and that's one of the reasons to make people feel.
I think it's more prosaic than that. I think management, the kinds of management that actually install surveillance technology of this kind, what they actually fear is that some people aren't doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And so the technology is intended to root out the people that aren't doing their jobs, and thus you're only left with people who are doing their best. I mean, as I said, I did some research in the call center. I never saw anybody slacking, and actually I was surprised, and I really was surprised, because you read the literature about how dreadful call centers are, that actually people seem to quite enjoy what they were doing. Some of them seemed highly motivated by the work they were doing. Some, not all. I'm not really the kind of sociologist who thinks that A, the world is getting worse, and B, that it's getting worse because of the introduction of new technological possibilities. If the world's getting worse, it's not because of technology.
Yeah. Because also, Dave, as a student, I've worked in a number of call centers, and it's so repetitive as well. I remember when I was in Australia, I was saying the same thing 8 times an hour, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, and I was saying it. I can even remember the script for like 20 years ago.
Yeah. But I may have used this example myself in my teaching when I was at MMU. But I used to use the example of working in a toy factory, which I did for a few months after I left university. And like you, I can remember the movements involved in this plastic extrusion work that I used to do. And it was incredibly boring, no question. I only lasted about 4 months before I gave it up because I hated it.
Yeah.
But I remember talking to a guy who'd been there for years and saying to him, don't you really hate this job? And he said, no, it's all right, he said. Besides, he said, what else can I do? In other words, if your expectations are high, then yes, you probably get frustrated in jobs of this kind and you don't want to do them, you get fed up. But if your expectations are very low, factory work has been going on for well over a century, And if people hated it so much, they'd have left in droves, and they don't, you know, because they've got nothing to go to. You know, routines are just that, they're routines. Some of us, for a variety of reasons, have different expectations. I mean, when I left university, I had a degree. I won't go into the details as to why I was working in a toy factory, but I didn't imagine for a second it was going to last that long. It was just a way of getting some money temporarily. It would have been very different if this is my job for life.
Yeah.
But if you know you've got nothing else to look forward to, you're going to have to accept it, aren't you?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dave. We're literally just a couple of minutes left. So I want to say again, you know, sincere thank you for joining us. I really enjoy kind of these interviews, and I hope, you know, for years to come, you know, others, you know, students will benefit from them. I've been speaking with my friends, and already a lot of people are kind of watching them, and we're getting a lot of benefit. So, you know, guys, you know, please have a look in the link in the description. I put, you know, Professor Dave Randall's work, so you can have a look at, you know, what he's done. And, you know, again, thank you to the audience. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Thank you. Bye.